Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. It's 3-easy does it for Liverpool as the Reds move to within just 3 wins of their first title since 1990. But you'll see all across the back papers, boss Jurgen Klopp's not getting carried away, the old cliché, after a nervy win over struggling Bournemouth at Anfield yesterday. That was watched by both Rob and Andy. We'll get their thoughts in a minute. There's also a little bit of kidology, when isn't there, from Jose Mourinho this morning as the Spurs manager lays into record signing Tanguy Ndombele. Most of the papers, the early editions at least, just missing out on that, but we'll dig into it as his side eke out a draw at Burnley. Meanwhile, Ollie gets a pep talk as Guardiola bigs up his derby rival ahead of this afternoon's Manchester derby at Old Trafford. One of the key players, though, the impact of Bruno Fernandes and what he's made since joining United. We'll talk about that. And one Beth England. Do you know the England striker? We'll see much more about her. Or will we, for England, as Phill Neville's Lionesses go again in the She Believes Cup? Should she, England, lead the lineup in the US? We'll ask that question as well. And finally, handshakes and virus chaos. Should football close its doors? We'll look more at the impact of the coronavirus on sports in part 5. And that's something the Mirror's chief sports writer, you wonder what I was going to say there, Andy Dunn, has touched on in his column today. Also joined by the Telegraph's chief sports writer, Paul Hayward, and Rob Draper here, chief football writer for the Mail on Sunday. Don't forget, you're part of it too. Use the tweet at SundaySup to get in touch with us, the hashtag too. The best will appear on screen over the next 90 minutes. I had a little brief flick up of the papers there. Both of you were at that game yesterday, and that's the focus for most of the papers. It's split on the back pages between Liverpool and then looking ahead to that Manchester derby. But you've gone early in your column, Mr. Dunn. I read to you. The Premier League title, such a formality. Question left, though, whether it's going to be presented in front of a crowd or not. This all around coronavirus and the impact it could have on Liverpool, which you wouldn't have expected to write, I guess.
No, at the start of the season, no. Certainly not a team winning the title in March. You know, and the possibility of a team winning the title in March, it'll probably be early April. And when you look at it, you think to yourself, you know, how 27 wins out of 29 games. It's a remarkable story, and that's why, you know, we're still leading on this story. It's why it still dominates, is because it's a remarkable story for a football team to win that amount of games, that percentage of games, 82 points. You know, when Klopp said it in the press conference yesterday, well, we passed 80 points today, you thought, you know, 82 points in March. It's just absolutely remarkable, and that's why it remains such a fascinating story. And this idea that they are, you know, somehow stumbling towards it. You know, I mean, it's just nonsense. You know, they won that game yesterday. OK, people are writing today saying it was a nervy win, but you know they deserved to win that game. Bournemouth might have got an equaliser later on. Liverpool probably should have been further ahead by then, and that's, I think, something that the discussion now has become about how good this Liverpool team is and how good this run has been. But you know what? I've seen an awful lot of Liverpool this season, an awful lot. And I can't remember seeing a game. Listen, I've seen games where maybe they've got a late winner that you think, oh, well, that might be, you know, that's the rub of the green. But I haven't seen a game that they've won and they haven't deserved to win. Not one game. I cannot say there's one game that I've seen them and I've said, well, you know what? They're fortunate to win that game. They might have been fortunate in the manner they've won it, but not in their overall performance. And that was the same yesterday. They continue to be the best team in games and win games, and that's why, you know, it'll go down as a remarkable campaign.
Not fortunate to win a game, deserved to win a game?
Well, I think I take a slight issue with that. I think that they're phenomenal this season, and the victories tell that story, don't they? I think that individually, some of the best football I've seen, other than the great Barcelona side in the last 20 years, was played by Liverpool, and it was played last season against Barcelona and the season before against Manchester City, and the 2 wins against Manchester City. Those performances were extraordinary, and I don't think they've quite hit those heights. Maybe they've not been tested. You know, it tends to come in Champions League quarter-finals or semi-finals and such like. So I haven't seen them quite as good as that, but they've just been so. I think this season's more about character. It's almost like at the end of last season, which was also phenomenal, but they didn't win the title. They've doubled down in terms of, like, we're going to do this. And it was reminding me of a team close to your heart, Andy, the Everton team. I think they won the Cup in '84. And there was almost a sense of inevitability because they were so good, even though they hadn't done that they'd probably win the league next season. And they, you know, they having not won it that season, they just went straight through and won it next season. And that's the sort of mentality Liverpool have. We were looking at their defensive record earlier, and it's actually not quite as good as last season. So it's not in the individual areas. So they're obviously brilliant everywhere, but it's not in those individual areas. It's more in a mentality that they just haven't let anything slip. They've been really ruthless. And I think it's Sheffield United away. Games that really should have probably been draws have turned into wins, which is how you end up with the extraordinary points total they have. I'm
not trying to stir it, but that point about whether they've deserved to win each one of those, I guess there's some West Ham fans that might have an argument about that. But no, he says the test of nerve from them, is it nervy?
No. If they're stumbling and staggering, I wish I could stumble and stagger like this. And
I've seen that a couple of times.
I keep coming back to this point that even if they lose to Atletico Madrid, they get knocked out of the Champions League on Wednesday night. When they win the title, almost certainly in March, they will be world, European and Premier League champions. And I promise you, in 2 years' time, nobody will look back at that achievement and say, oh, they had a bit of a stumble in late February, early March after they had their mini break. I think the analysis of their slight dip in performances doesn't take any account of the law of human nature, which is that when you were that far clear in a title race, you are bound to slacken off. Maybe 5%, and 5% can be enough in the Premier League for you to make a defensive error at Watford or against Bournemouth, as they did yesterday, and for the other team to score. They haven't kept a clean sheet in 5, Liverpool. So the performances aren't at the level they were at, but they are on their way to a monumental achievement in English football. And I agree with both these guys. The ruthlessness is there, the mentality is there, and the talent is there, and the numbers are certainly there. We're looking at one of the great English football. Not 1 season, 2 seasons, because they will be champions of everything by the time this is over.
I think what sort of made people talk about this scenario really, how good a team are they, and would it be an anticlimax if they only win the Premier League? Well, of course it wouldn't be. I mean, everything has been. They've lifted the Champions League last year. Everything has been focused on winning that Premier League, to the exclusion of almost everything else. I'm sure they've still given the Champions League maximum attention, but certainly to the cup competitions. And so you've got this scenario because they're so far ahead. You could have the scenario where if they don't get past Atletico Madrid on Wednesday, and then City lose the next couple of games, Liverpool could win the league in sort of mid-March and have nothing else, and then that's it then. So you've got 2 months of this season left, which is basically one lap of honour, 2 months, 8 games.
Does that matter on their legacy?
No, it doesn't matter on the legacy. And also, what I would say, sort of almost being devil's advocate, is the sense that when we talk about record points and the amount of wins, when you look back at teams that have won the title, you don't say, well, they won the title. You might say Guardiola's team won it with 100 points. That was a notable achievement. But in general, you don't look back and say, you don't differentiate between teams that have won it with 79 points and teams that have won it with 99 points. United champions. When United won the treble, I think it was around about 80 points, 79 points that won the league. They were only 1 point clear of Arsenal. But we don't say that. We don't say, that wasn't a great season in the Premier League because they only won it with X amount of points. We say that was the greatest year from a domestic club. So that's, I get why people might say on the outside, well, they've not sacrificed the FA Cup, but he still didn't play his strongest team in the FA Cup at Stamford Bridge. They gave it a good go, but it still wasn't his strongest team. Obviously, they were at the Carabao Cup. So that's the thing. People look at it but that's from the outside. They'll say, well, your season isn't going on. But you've got to understand that winning the Premier League was the be-all and end-all for Liverpool. It's what Jurgen Klopp was brought in for. It's what managers for the last 3 decades have been brought in for, to win this Premier League. And he's going to do it.
Because 30 years for a club of Liverpool's stature and their European stature is an epoch, isn't it?
Yes.
It's one of the great anomalies, really, in the English game, that it's been 30 years. They've never won the Premier League. The last time they won the title, it wasn't even the Premier League,
Yes.
And so this has been one of the great quests, and they have come fairly close to it. Brendan Rodgers came close to it. Rafa Benitez comes close to it. But this time, they're going to cross the line with a rose between their teeth, really. It's an amazing, amazing performance.
I think also it's a generational thing, because if you're under the age of 30, all you've known is Liverpool side that, come close occasionally, but aren't Premier League champions. For those of us who remember that sort of those great Liverpool sides that will win the league, and you felt like that would go on forever, and then to see them sort of fall away in the relative decline of them, it's like this, the scale of this for I'm not obviously for young fans it's important as well, but for fans and for people who've lived through that. And it's only a couple of years, 18 months ago, we were talking about the other day that Jamie Carragher was writing in his Telegraph column that he, possibly in his lifetime he wouldn't see Liverpool win the league because City looked so dominant and Liverpool looked a long way behind sort of 2 years ago. Didn't you thought, well, maybe that can. So the fact that it's happened and the fact that it's going to happen, I wasn't convinced that. I thought, well, maybe who knows what happened in 10 years. You didn't see Liverpool. You think this could have gone on for 35 years, 40 years or something. And the scale of that achievement is going to be one of the huge stories in English football history.
And let's face it, they could still turn over Atletico on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And defend their European crown. What a season that would be. You would not put that past them.
You just said what a season that would be. So do they need to do that?
No, because of the 30-year thing.
So. No.
But if the point, as Paul makes, they'll be sort of triple crown winners, won't they, if they do this? And it's the scale of, we are talking about one of the great teams, and you put them up there because they've won the Champions League, and are they going to win the league? And that's a great debate at Manchester City, isn't it? Obviously, if they won a Champions League this season, that would change that. But there is a domestic sort of wall around Manchester City's achievements, brilliant though they are. They're not in that sphere where you've actually won a Champions League as well. And that's where you measure the great teams like the Nottingham Forests and the Liverpools of the past.
It's because it's emotive, isn't it? That's why we follow football. We want that emotional attachment to it because it's a similar thing. And you can skew these stats however you like, but a few months ago, it was almost Salah not maybe having the greatest season. And with your test of nerve bit, that great picture of him, and we've got the 70 goals, 100 Premier League appearances. You're thinking, still in form, Mo Salah, that's all right, that'll do, won't it?
Yeah, no, but he's been in consistent form from the moment he joined Liverpool. Simple as that. He reached 20 goals by December of his first season, 20 by January of his second season, 20 by March of his third season. And that's no sign of deterioration, even though it's a bit longer each time. And I would have thought, again, I haven't got them to hand, but I would have thought 7 or 8 assists this season. I would have thought already, same as Mane. They come up with these assists as well. And it's his, and it goes for the rest of the forward line. It's also their durability. You don't underestimate. We speak a lot at this stage of the season about teams coping, I'm sure we'll come on to other clubs, with injuries to key players. Harry Kane to Spurs, for example, just one example of that. And their durability, those three, including Salah, I think is remarkable. They are injured now and again. They do suffer the odd knock, I mean, Mane's, missed some. They've all missed some game time at some stage. But, to be able to actually, as a manager, say, well, you know what, I've got those three, pretty much week in, week out, and to produce the combined assists and goals that they do is fantastic. And I think
people say, he's slightly quieter these days. Well, I think the spectacular aspect's gone out of his game slightly because he doesn't have to make these 40-yard runs anymore. I think when he first hit his peak, he was playing a kind of Messi-esque type of game where he was running 30 yards with the ball and beating 3 people and and slicing it past the goalkeeper. Now, because the whole team's performance has come up a level, I don't think he has to do that so much anymore. He can just rely on his natural finishing ability and be more of a kind of a clinical goal scorer. He doesn't have to carry the team in the way that he did when Liverpool were arriving at the point where they are now, because basically everybody in that team contributes hugely.
He's also only quieter by comparison to Messi and Ronaldo, isn't it? I mean, people who've made 40 goals a season like a normative thing, which it isn't, and he had that phenomenal season, and even at the time, Klopp was saying that obviously he's not going to score 40 goals every single season. And if you score 30, that's extraordinary. So we've been spoilt in this generation. We're obviously desperately looking for the next one, but I think they have skewed the debate in that sense because they just are so phenomenal.
Yeah, involved in 29 goals in all competitions this season, 9 assists in all of them.
Right.
If you are talking about injuries, though, you were both at the game yesterday, you got your programme looked at the front, and there's Alisson right in the front of the programme. Missing him, changes, maybe tweaks, Henderson, Gomez being out too. How's that affected the balance?
It was strange because Alisson was actually at Stamford Bridge on Tuesday. Even though he wasn't playing or wasn't on the bench, he was at Stamford Bridge. And it turns out he's got a knock. Now, if he had that knock beforehand, I don't exactly know why he went.
It's a hip, he injured his hip, didn't he, just before the game?
Something like that.
Jurgen said afterwards that they were going to put him on the bench. I thought it was a minor.
Oh, they were at Stamford Bridge.
They were going to put him on the bench,
see.
and then they said, well, let's not take a risk. And then they had it scanned the next day, and it turned out to be more serious, like, might be a week or so. So that was it. That's what they were going to risk him, but decided not to.
I mean, it's a huge blow, isn't it? Particularly coming up to the Champions League game and bearing in mind what happened at Chelsea with Alisson letting that one from Willian in, but Adrian letting that one from Willian in. I mean, having said that, when he deputised for Alisson early in the season, I don't think he particularly sort of did anything spectacularly wrong. You'd obviously rather have Alisson in, but I think actually what might be the biggest setback from that is the relationship between the defence and the goalkeeper. To me, at Chelsea on Tuesday, the defence looked quite vulnerable, but I just I got the impression that they were sort of dropping back. They weren't too sure of Adrian in a position. It's only natural. You become used to the way your goalkeeper operates. You know how far outside the box he's going to come, how he's going to clear up outside, exactly what his movements, where he's going to distribute it, and you have faith in him. And, when you've got a keeper that you're not playing with all the time, I just think it takes time for that relationship to develop.
I also think that the reason why Manchester City and Liverpool are so far ahead of the rest of the Premier League, and those City in points totals aren't, but reality, they are. Obviously, these are the two brilliant teams of this era, is Alisson and Ederson. And what they've brought to goalkeeping, it's a distribution from the back. It's obviously they're great shot savers as well, but the distribution from the back is on a level beyond what the rest of the Premier League goalkeepers are operating at, and that makes the whole team tick. So that's the big problem when you lose them. Same for Bravo and Manchester City, and the same for Adrian and Liverpool.
You said, I'm going to out you now. We were talking in the green room before about actually also that high line that they've been playing and how they've worked VAR out, and about whether that's.
Well, it's just interesting with that stat that they've caught sides offside more than any, a lot more than any other side. And I think they looked at VAR earlier, obviously looked at how VAR is going to be implemented. And my great beef with VAR is that it's taken us back to 1990 when offside was level, basically. Now it's more or less level because you can scrutinise it in such detail that it's very hard to sort of, be onside and marginal onside. And I think they realised offside traps in the 1980s were really easy to play, and we got a lot of dull football because of that. Not suggesting Liverpool are dull, I'm just saying they're playing a very high line because I think they know that they can catch people offside easier, and they've got the protection of VAR to catch someone offside even if the referee misses it.
I think they're telling me to go to a break, but you just said Liverpool are dull, so at least we can go for it. I'm kidding. I'm as bad as them, aren't I? We will talk, I'm sure, no doubt, more about Liverpool in the coming weeks. When will it be done? That's the big question now. Coming up, though, in part 2, we'll be discussing Tottenham and, in particular, how you get the best from a player. Taking a late breakfast with Andy, Paul and Rob. Though, Rob, we discovered in the break that someone's already been for a double-cooked breakfast this morning without us. Never mind that. I said it's a little bit off-putting sitting here looking at you, Paul, mainly because there's a big picture of Jose Mourinho just behind your head. And he's not the focus on the early editions of the papers. They're talking about Ali rescuing a point from Mourinho in the 1-1 draw with Burnley, so it's all about the penalty for Ali there. But the quotes that came out afterwards from Mourinho around Ndombele and the midfield in particular, let me know whether you think he's calling him out or not. In the first half, he says, we didn't have a midfield. Of course, I'm not speaking of Oliver Skip, because he's a kid who's 19, who's played 2 hours in the last few days. I don't criticise him at all. Jose then goes on to say, but I'm not going to run away, and I have to say he, meaning Ndombele, has had enough time to come to a different level. I know the Premier League is difficult. Some players take a long time to adapt to a different league. He goes on to say he's a player with a great talent. He has to know he has to do much better. Can't keep giving him opportunities to play because the team is much more important. Just leave that hanging there.
Well, most managers would recoil from that, and I remember Gary Lineker was wincing about it on Match of the Day last night. There's this code. You could say that to him in the dressing room. You wouldn't say that in front of a camera. To pick out an individual and sort of, blame him, demonise him for a bad first half. So it's an unusual tactic. It's a familiar one because he does it a lot. We remember him doing it at Manchester United with, say, Mkhitaryan, for example, who just disappeared off the face of the earth, and Mourinho kept making these kind of loaded comments about him. He puts these players through a kind of boot camp, doesn't he? A psychological boot camp if he thinks they're not up to speed in the Premier League. There always seems to be a big price tag involved, as if he does. The more you cost, the more he's going to go after you. When I watched the analysis of that game last night, I didn't think Ndombele was any worse than any other Tottenham midfielder in that first half, so I'm not quite sure why he picked him out. Presumably it's cumulative and he feels that he's not contributing enough in general and he's not training well enough or whatever it is. But I think to expose a player like that, I don't see that that's likely to help him unless Mourinho has decided that the way to get him going is to embarrass him, really, sort of humiliate him, really, in front of the cameras. Then how is that possibly going to help the player?
Is it any different, though, from the Pochettino quotes saying that it would take a couple of years for us to see the best from Ndombele?
I think it is different. I don't recall exactly what Pochettino said, but that was very early days, and I think it's self-evident that for a lot of players, not many players hit the... I mean, Bruno Fernandes has hit the Premier League and hit the ground running, but that's quite rare, isn't it? It does take time to get used to the physicality, to the pace of the game. So, in one sense, there's nothing wrong with what Mourinho is saying. It's quite sensible analysis. They probably do need more from him, and he does need to adapt quicker. He's a big transfer fee, but it's the question of doing it in public. And I was intrigued last week. Spoke to Nuno at Wolves, who's obviously Jose's sort of, he's not protégé, but he played under Jose at Porto and now is a manager. And he was saying how he wants to bring a club of no conflict at all, and he doesn't like these sort of arguments and calling people out, and almost quite a hippie-ish sort of approach to it. And we said to him, well, there's some managers who might manage by conflict. He goes, well, I'm not that guy. And I was thinking, well, there's one in particular that that is Jose's style, is that he wants to manage by conflict. And talking to Nuno, it brings home the point that lots of people are making. It's like, well, how does that work with this generation? Does that still work? Obviously, it was, when we were growing up, it was probably much more of a thing. And 10 years ago, maybe you could get away with it. I'm just not sure that it's the way to get the best out of this particular generation of young players. But the proof will be in how he responds, won't it? Yeah,
exactly. And if he doesn't respond in the right way, if he doesn't respond, then Jose's got a point. I think we've got to be... I think there's a slight irony when we discuss this type of thing, because when we ask a question, we want an honest answer. As journalists, all sat around the table now, we want an honest answer from a manager. Yeah. And when he gives an honest answer like this, we can say, oh, that's terrible, he shouldn't be doing this to his player. Well, actually, that's what we want him to do. Yeah. Now, that's on a basic level. We can't sit around and say, oh, this manager speaks too honestly and he's thrown his player under a bus. Well, I'll be honest with you, that's what makes good copy for us. What makes good talking points is when Mourinho does something like this. And I take the guy's points, is that in this day and age, it seems to be not the thing to do. It's not something that Jurgen Klopp would do. It's not something that... Well, I mean, Pep Guardiola maybe... I don't think
the older managers did it, though, did they? I mean, you wouldn't have... I mean, Sir Alex Ferguson, for example, that was anathema to him to pick out a player like that and individualise it. And I mean, if he'd stopped at saying the midfield was no good in the first half, I needed to make a change, then you could have inferred from that Ndombele was not very good and he took him off. But then to hone in on him as an individual and say that this guy is not performing, this guy let me down, that's where it escalates, I think. And you plant in the idea of every pundit and every fan this idea that Ndombele is a problem,
Yeah. But, well, yes, I mean, I see where you're coming from with that, but then I remember earlier this season, Dean Henderson made a terrible mistake. And, everyone was, oh, what a shame. Chris Wilder came on television and said, it was unforgivable. It was a terrible mistake. He shouldn't be doing it. Oh, my word. What's he said there? Well, what's he supposed to say? And how's Dean Henderson responded? He's probably been the best keeper in the league since that mistake. So, I just think we can't be too... he's a big money player. I'm sure he's not that sensitive a soul that when Jose says, well, actually, he could be doing a bit better in public, that he shouldn't take that on board.
I think there is a difference between public and private, because I think those criticisms absolutely should be addressed at him. And I said he's a big money signing. It might take him a season to properly get his sort of where he is in English football, but he can't be putting in the performance he's putting in now. And that's all, he cannot hide from that criticism. But it's where you do that criticism. And obviously for us, it's great he does it in public. And do it in public, great, we've got something to talk about. But now we're not talking about what's good copy for us. We're talking about analysing the management style. And in the management style, is that going to work for him? Now, if it does work, and then Ndombele goes, well, I'm going to show you, and he comes back, well, fair enough, it still works. But the evidence of Jose's last few clubs is that it's not working massively well for him. Didn't seem to work for when he called out Luke Shaw, and it didn't seem to work, when he's called out other players. So that, I think that's the issue at the heart of it is it still working for Jose, who is one of the great managers?
Yes.
Because this is always divides people. It's like, oh, you haven't got Jose. He's one of the great managers. He's an iconic manager. He's changed the games in many ways. So all that is said, the question is now, in these last few years, is his management style still getting the best out of people? However, I go back to the second place he got for Manchester City 2 years ago, probably is his greatest achievement. As he said, getting that Man United team to chase down a phenomenal City team was good. So there's pros and cons to the Jose debate, but that's the issue for me. Is it still working for him?
But again, what do you expect sometimes for managers to do when we can all go online and we can all watch short videos of Ndombele playing? And we can all see that he doesn't put in the type of effort that it should be. There should be a given at a Premier League club or any professional club. So, when Jose's talking about it, do we really expect him to sugarcoat the whole thing, or just to say, oh, no, I'm not talking about that. We're all doing well. We're all fine, lads. Don't worry. It's great. When we can see for our own eyes, when fans can see it, and fans will then turn around, surely, and say, well, why are you trying to pull the wool over our eyes? We can see that he's not delivering on what we expected.
The Wilder point's right on that, isn't it? In that we expect, if we all are sat there and saying it, you look pretty daft as a manager if you're not reflecting that.
But again, I do understand the idea of man management, and I do understand the idea that other players in the squad will be looking at that and thinking, well, I'll be next. Basically, that is. I guess what you're talking about is an unwritten code that you don't go out there and criticise in public. And
part of the problem.
Well, you just wonder what the gain is. So he's an arch pragmatist, isn't he? He doesn't really do anything unless there's a marginal gain involved. So when he says that about an individual player and plants the idea in everybody's head, as I said, that there's a problem with this guy because he's not contributing. What is the gain? The only possible gain can be that the player responds, as you said, Rob, and starts putting a bigger shift in. If that doesn't happen, he's alienated the player. He's created a kind of an atmosphere around the squad, and I just think that the atmosphere is so febrile these days that if you do that in public, then it becomes a perception about that player, and it just gives you a problem.
And the broader issue is, which Daniel Levy would be concerned about, is that he devalues the player.
Well, £54 million, it's a record signing.
Absolutely, so. But now if he's not going to play him, if he clearly thinks he's not up to it, then Tottenham will try and get rid, I assume, as long as Jose's in charge. And he devalues
he's not going to sell him to a Premier League club if you say he's not up to speed in the Premier League. So now you're looking at the European market.
Hey, we're miles away from that. We think, well, at least for the moment. I guess the counter-argument too is then, if he does talk about the midfield, doesn't mention him, then does it all get weighted down on Skip? So
but he picked the midfield. It's one thing. Okay, they've got injury issues, but he picked Oliver Skip, didn't he? So if he wasn't, you didn't think he's up to it, because he's only then. Why did you pick him?
Moving on to the game itself then, with Burnley and then Spurs getting that draw out of them, is that the sort of game, and that's unfair on Burnley then, isn't it, that Spurs would expect to go and get 3 points from? So is there right for Spurs fans to have this kind of, this haze that seems to be at White Hart Lane at the moment?
Well, I think that when Pochettino left, I think the Spurs were at the end of a cycle. I think that team had reached a natural end, and that's partly why he left. So the expectation was that Mourinho would come in and sort of, energise it and kind of somehow finagle them back into the top four, and all the structural problems will be forgotten. But I don't think he's been able to do that precisely because the problems run much deeper than Pochettino's management. So I think they've got a lot of work to do, and I think he's trying to find a formula and trying to apply all his managerial nous and experience to make Spurs look better than they are. He's changed them in the sense that they're less positive. I think they're more cautious, and a lot of people are kind of resistant to that, certainly Tottenham fans. But I can actually understand what he's doing. He's trying to find a group of players who will play a more pragmatic style of play to get them into a position of solidity in the table where they can then think again about recruitment.
The table's key, right? So we've got Chelsea, Everton, 2 o'clock. You can watch that on Sky Premier League this afternoon. So that's a big game for the whole race for Europe. Everton's suddenly in that race too. Spurs, Chelsea, Everton. Who comes out of the tumble of that one?
The Jose bet works if they make the top 4, maybe top 5 this season. Obviously,
Think they will?
If they, well, I mean, it's in the balance, isn't it? I mean, and I wouldn't blame him for the style he's adopting at the moment, because I know Jose haters will jump on it, but if you lose Kane and Son, then it's fair enough to say we're going to have to be more pragmatic. We're going to have to play a slightly different way. And it seems to me they brought in Jose because that was a bet that he might get us in the top 4 at the time, and now maybe the top 5. And if that comes off, then it's worked. But if it doesn't come off, Jose Mourinho is not a natural Europa League manager. You know, that seems like a difficult fit for that club to be in the Europa League with Jose Mourinho as manager, and he can't see it lasting that long. And well, will they do it? I mean, the balance, you know, it's so finely balanced. When you throw in the fact that it might be 5th place as well, there's all sorts of permutations for Sheffield United, for Everton, for teams that, you know, maybe wouldn't at the start of the season thought we're going for Champions League qualifications. We'll be looking at it now and thinking we can hit that 5th spot.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Europa League would have been the last tournament he won, wouldn't it? I would have thought.
No, I mean, he's got quite a good record. He's won it twice, yeah.
Yeah, but what I mean,
now,
just ironically, just pointing out, I would be
but
more...
he wasn't very happy in that.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And I would be more concerned if I was a Tottenham fan, not with the comments that he's made about his own player last night, but about the comments before the game, about the suggestion before the game that he was going to say to the board, you know, is Burnley more important or Leipzig more important? Well, I mean... Really, I mean, it's just that's just purely him saying, you know, purely him being unnecessarily downbeat about things, making basically excuses ahead of that Burnley game, and I think that negative mindset. I mean, I like Jose Mourinho a lot, but I just think the negativity in terms of on the field, trying to defend, sit back on a 1-goal lead, that sort of thing, that's in the past tense now. Modern management, they're not doing that. Klopp's not doing that. Guardiola's not doing that. Now, he hasn't got the resources they've got, but even so, the knee-jerk instinctive reaction to basically try and hold what you have isn't the way forward anymore.
Hey, look, I get enough of Spurs at home, so let's briefly talk about Chelsea-Everton then, because no one's gone with the Ancelotti derby. Where were you all in the headlines?
We missed that
going to happen. Whatever you think about his treatment or otherwise with Chelsea, the team that he takes into this game, very different from the team he inherited at Everton. He's structured them well.
Ancelotti at Everton. Yeah, you would expect that. I mean, it was a luxury acquisition for Everton, wasn't it, getting Carlo Ancelotti? And one of the problems they had was that they had good or promising players who weren't performing, and there wasn't a shape or a structure to the team to enable them to perform. He's created an environment where those players are able to, you know, show what they are and what they have. It's taken them, you know, up the table. The results have improved, performances have improved. Everton fans are happier. So it was a good move. I doubted whether it would last very long personally, because I just couldn't see him settling there. Really, he might feel that he was there to do a job and you know, top up his income for a while. But actually, it's going really well, and you know, good luck to them.
I think I'm with Paul. It was at the time, you know, when it was first suggested, you thought, well, why would he go there? I mean, I think he really has bought into the Moshiri plan or grand idea. How he'll be able to do that in terms of financial fair play, I'm not entirely sure. But I think Carlo has bought into that, and I think he is looking long term. I think he would see it as a massive achievement if he could get Everton in the Champions League. It won't be next season. They won't finish top 4 this season, or top 5 maybe, depending on what happens to City. But I think next season and the season after they will. I mean, this is shown by, you know, good young players committing themselves to the club, to the future. Mason Holgate, Dominic Calvert-Lewin will be soon. They've got a good nucleus of young players. They've got, I think, exciting players. I think Richarlison will be, you know, people laughed the other week when he was linked with a foreign club for, I can't remember, was it Barcelona or Real Madrid for, I can't remember what it was.
60 million was
100 million, I think, was the fee. And I remember driving home, listening to the radio, and people were laughing at that. Well, you know, that's what he will be very shortly, if not now. That type bracket of player. So I think it's immensely promising. And everything you hear from behind the scenes is that you might expect Ancelotti to come in with his CV, his pedigree, his, you know, to be slightly maybe aloof or, you know, because he's got very little to prove. But apparently it couldn't be further from the truth. Apparently it's absolutely the opposite. And they bought into him. The dynamic with Duncan Ferguson seems an odd one, but that seems to work. And it's just great to have those positive times around. And what will be interesting is how Moshiri now takes it on from here. Because don't forget, also there'll be the investment in the new stadium, which might be probably some way down the line, 3 or 4 years. But I think it's really, really exciting times for Everton. And I think what would be great is if the Ancelotti does have a while there. You know, listen, he hasn't stayed overly long places recently, but you know, I think Everton and Everton fans and the Everton management are trying to sell him a 4 or 5 year plan.
So you think he's changed? Because I mean, he's always been a front end manager. Hasn't he? He's never been a club restructurer. He stays 2 or 3 years. Does a great job at the front of the operation. Yeah. So why has he bought into Everton?
I can only assume he's been sold on what Moshiri and Marcel Brands have told him. Maybe, you know, it might sound a little bit romantic. Maybe he. In the same way, I think that if you think about Klopp, when Klopp took over at Liverpool, it appealed to him. You know, I mean, he could have waited for United, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich. What appealed to him was the challenge. You know, I'm sure there's. Listen, there's money as well, and let's not pretend that Ancelotti is now not one of the most well-remunerated managers in the Premier League, because he is clearly. So that's clearly an element. But the challenge that Klopp took on was that challenge. Whoever. Now, Liverpool and Everton obviously at different situations, but whoever turned Liverpool back, whoever rediscovered the old Liverpool, whoever took Liverpool back to title-winning days, after everything that had gone on, was always going to be basically a legend, you know. And there's the feel of the club, the feel of the area, and that all appealed to Klopp. Now, I'm not saying Ancelotti's the same, but maybe he was sold this challenge of, you know, listen, Everton, the guy who takes Everton back to the days, back to somewhere near the great days, you know, of the mid-'80s, etc. Yeah. He will be a hero, and maybe he's bought into that.
And he's already been sent off, so he's caught the Goodison mood, you know, the kind of the combative kind of Goodison.
He's been shopping in Beetle Strand and stuff like that, you know. When we all thought that he'd be, you know, out eating, you know, Italian food in South Cheshire somewhere.
Ancelotti does. He's really good at every club he goes to. He always goes out and makes sure he's seen out and about in town.
Hey, you know what I'm going to say? We have to wrap that. Yeah. Because otherwise, we won't be able to talk about the Manchester derby, the first Manchester derby in forever that we've not spent 4 hours on.
Yeah,
it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Coming up then in part 3, we will be doing just that, previewing this afternoon's Manchester derby at Old Trafford. Who is it a bigger game for? At Sunday Sup, to get in touch with us on social media, Andy Dunn's here. He's been telling stories. Also with us, Paul Hayward and Rob Draper. The papers are a bit split this morning. Obviously, understandably, you got the reaction to yesterday, so no title fever, are you sure, Jurgen? So split on the Liverpool chat, and then the Manchester derby as well. Ole gets a pep talk. Guardiola bigs up derby rival. So Pep Guardiola talking about the merits of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Special one and special gun. That's how the Star splits it. Again, those two games. 4:30 today, you'll be able to watch that game on Sky Premier League. Manchester United, Man City, and then Ole, Ole, Ole. This is about Pep singing Solskjaer's praises in the mirror. Very much the reflection across all of them. And then there's an in-depth piece with Graham Souness talking about the impact of one player in particular. Amongst you all then, Bruno Fernandes, has this suddenly become the game that, if he hasn't already made his mark, Paul, that he makes his mark on Manchester? Yeah,
Bruno Fernandes is being talked about at every dinner party in the land. He's the most fashionable topic of conversation in the country, I think, at the moment. Well, there's a couple of others as well, but it's amazing. You know, what Manchester United needed to do was sign good midfield players. That was obvious 2-3 years ago. They signed a succession of duds. McTominay has progressed. Pogba's been injured, but Bruno Fernandes is exactly what they needed. He's a classic driving, dominating, controlling, highly accomplished central midfield player. And obviously, the effect he's had is to sort of invigorate, inspire the players around him, give Manchester United's play greater strength and dynamism, and the results obviously speak for themselves. I mean, they've risen without trace, really, Manchester United. They're 3 points behind Chelsea. They could get into the Champions League, and it's got the potential to be a remarkable turnaround. And as Rob said during the break, suddenly they're making better signings. You know, they made bad signings for 5 years, mostly bad signings, and the players they bought stagnated or even regressed there. But now they're starting to buy people who are going there to develop their careers, and you know, in another couple of years, I think who was it that said the other day? Was it Roy Keane said it's going to take a couple of years, and it will. There's a lot of work to be done clearly. cleaning out this squad, rebuilding this squad, but the signs at the moment are vaguely promising.
I can't believe that they actually didn't get the signing done on January the 1st. I mean, that's one thing about United is that sometimes it does take a little bit longer. He should have been through the door then. Again, I saw him. I've seen quite a bit of him recently, and I saw him on Thursday at Derby County when he didn't have his best game there, and Solskjaer said as much. But what was interesting is the way already within just over half a dozen games you can see how demanding he is. And Solskjaer came out with a great quote after that game to say that the Fernandes doesn't think 99% is good enough, you know. And again, it sounds a bit soundbitey and a bit like that should be a given anyway. But you watch him play, and he's now not afraid from moment one to basically have a go at his fellow midfielders, his fellow teammates. He's now, you know, encouraging them. He's talkative. I know we sometimes blithely say, well, you need leaders. Well, United have now they've got a leader in defence in Harry Maguire, and they've got a leader in midfield. He'll be more of a leader. Well, he's shown himself to be more of a leader than Paul Pogba in a very brief, short space of time. He's obviously clearly a very good player as well, always looking to get forward, to looking to be a goal threat as much as anything else, good from dead ball situations. He looks a fantastic signing, and as I say, I just get the impression that his character fits the bill as well. You know, and I think now if you're signing players like that, Maguire's character, good, you know, strong, you know, will basically take no lack of effort from his colleagues. Fernandes the same. I think you know it is promising. I mean, today will obviously be a huge test for them. But I'm with Paul. I think we have to buy in. Well, we don't have to, but the more Solskjaer and Edward would tell us this is a long-term thing, a long-term recruitment line, a long-term vision, we're not going to be where we want to be until 18 months' time, 2 years then. I think at the moment, when results go for you, you go with it.
Just to correct myself, it was Wayne Rooney, of course, who said it would take 2 years, and I think he's right. But suddenly the pace is increasing, and if they can get into the top four, imagine how good they'll feel over the summer. Imagine how confident they'll feel about you know this. And Solskjaer will keep his job, of course,
So
which he probably will anyway.
It's definitely a big game for United. Watching City, it's really interesting watching City at Real Madrid because they look back to like themselves and their foot's been off the gas, it feels like. I think it was Bernardo who made those comments that when they went 7-8 points behind, they began to think it wasn't possible, or 10 points behind, and they eased off and they shouldn't have done. And that's what it's looked like watching City games at the moment. It doesn't feel like there's that much on them because there's no threat to them in the Premier League. They're going to finish second. They're going to qualify for the Champions League. So it's in the Champions League where you see, you saw an edge to them. You saw a sort of like, this is a real tactical battle. We're really being tested here, and we really want to go for it. And it suddenly looked like a side that I still think their defence might struggle at the sharp end of the Champions League, but it suddenly looked like a side that were Champions League contenders, whereas playing like they were in January and February, you're thinking, well, I wouldn't put all your eggs in the Champions League basket because you're not going to win it playing like this. This is a much bigger game for United. I mean, obviously City can't lose the derby because, local pride and all the rest of it, but United need the points much more than City do. I doubt they'll get them because they're not as good a side. But that long-term thing is, if you go Wan-Bissaka, Daniel James, Harry Maguire, now Bruno, these are players that have improved the team, and that's quite a good hit rate. And if you keep doing that, you're not going to get them all right. If you keep doing that, then incrementally, with the resources United get, they will get back to, maybe not to Liverpool, Man City levels, but they will get back to third in the Premier League and that kind of level, and maybe that's where they're heading.
That
not this season, but for next season.
I don't think many would argue with you squad-wise that they're not as good a side, but the time, the place, what City have, whether they had their wobble and are now OK, are they that far apart?
Yes, they're still an awful long way apart. And I think what Manchester United haven't developed yet is a kind of a style of play, an identity, if you like. Manchester City do have an identity. Although, in the last few weeks, I think what Guardiola's been doing at City is very interesting because he's made a lot of tweaks and changes and tried different formula, and has been actually very successful with his tactical experimentation, as he was at Real Madrid.
Did you all look at that lineup, by the way, against Real Madrid, and did you do the most of I heard on the radio, oh, what's he doing? And then eat your words?
Frankly, yes, yeah, absolutely. it looked an odd team selection, but it worked. He spotted weaknesses in Real Madrid, and he spotted a potential to change the game in the second half. And so I think he's, you know, we all think of him as this great stylist, but actually in the last few weeks I think he's shown these other levels and dimensions.
Yeah, there's a practical element to that, and that probably comes back to the fact, and this hooks up with the importance of today's game, or the relative importance to City or United, is that I know it's 10 days away, but the most important game for City is Real Madrid at home, without a doubt. Which is why, for example, if there's any hint of a doubt about Kevin De Bruyne's fitness today, which there seems to be, I know it was quite positive yesterday, but you know, why would you risk him in a high-octane derby game 10 days before the Real Madrid game? I mean, I know you want to keep up what is a great record at Old Trafford. You know, they would do like nothing better than to go and win there yet again. But even so, you would take no risks, you know, a week and a half away from that Champions League game, because now that the league's gone, the Premier League's gone, you know, that's what the rest of his season's got to be tailored around, is the Premier League. But
well, even rested De Bruyne in a League Cup final.
Well, exactly. So you know, you would think that he will make some changes today, but that's why I think United might sneak it today. And I think mainly because they're in a great frame of mind and a good vein of form, as are City. But I just think they might just have the mental edge today. I just think that City might not be as motivated as maybe United are today.
And of course, they've already beaten them in the League Cup, away in the League too. It's that away record's interesting between these two, and the away team winning.
But the game at the Etihad was interesting because Paul was talking about style. The only style Solskjaer's developed, I think, so far has been that incredible counter-attacking style. And when they get it right, they're really good. And that day at the Etihad, they were superb. You know, they played that brilliantly. But for me, that's not a style for Manchester United consistently. No, that's just a reactive style. What maybe Bruno Fernandes brings to them is the great teams, when other sides, you know, when you've got possession and sides are sitting back against you, can you then create? And Solskjaer hasn't shown enough of that at United, and that won't be the dynamic of the game today. But that's what he's got to do to prove that he's a long-term Manchester United manager, not just play, you know, great football on the counter.
Last word, Paul?
No, I agree with that. But if you spent 5 years recruiting players who don't fit together, it's going to take you a while to find your identity, isn't it, and your style of play. So. Yeah. Identity,
style. So the Manchester derby then reflecting on most of the back pages and looking back as well at Liverpool. That dominates the back pages. But we're on to England next. In part 4, we'll be talking England as they take on Japan in the She Believes Cup. That's coming up later. England wins it for England. That headline is my dream. So England take on Japan later in the She Believes Cup. Beth England has been the subject of social media over the past couple of days. Why isn't she starting for Phill Neville's England team? She's shown real form with Chelsea in the Super League. I mentioned Alex's strong words. She and Leanne Sanderson, former England strikers, over the past couple of days, just saying that England have gone backwards with Phill Neville. They walked out with the trophy under their arm to America, Paul. They wanted to defend it. Defeat to the USA first off.
Yeah, well, I suppose you have to, if you look at the cycle, you have to go back to the Women's World Cup last year. I mean, I covered 3 games there, and I felt the team was getting less good as the tournament progressed. And then when they left France, there have been all sorts of difficulties. The form has really, really dipped. And so you start to ask yourself whether it's Phill Neville's management or whether there's a problem with the quality of player. You know, whether they peaked last year in the She Believes Cup and in the early stages of that World Cup, and whether they're now finding their natural level. But Phill Neville's management is obviously a source of kind of endless debate, because constantly changing the team, changing the system, likes to rotate, likes to try things out, keeps the players in a state of sort of perpetual uncertainty, if you like. And I suppose this is the crunch point now, where there is so much opinion in favour of Beth England starting that if he gets this wrong and they lose to Japan later, I think people will start to question whether he should carry on in the job. You know,
really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think he knows that. You know, if they regress in this tournament after a disappointing second half of the World Cup campaign and a difficult period since, then you'd have to say that they're starting to struggle, you know.
Do you concede anything to the fact that he may be looking towards the Olympics in Tokyo? He's got to balance it up, hasn't he, between building this England team for 2021 and the Euros, but also maybe some of those players from Scotland, Wales, that he might bring into that squad?
Well, that's how he'll be judged. I mean, the point is, though, is that if you're looking at the England men's team, the England women's team, if an England men's manager had lost 6 in 9, then the chances are he'd be under severe pressure. I don't think Phill is under pressure. I don't think that, regardless of the results tonight, I don't think that he will be relieved of his duties. I think he will be judged on what happens at the Olympics and then subsequently after that at subsequent tournaments. But I watched the game the other night when I came in, and I'm with Paul. I didn't cover any World Cup games, but I did watch them on TV, and to me, the standard of that the other night against the States. Now, listen, they're an incredible team. Their record, I mean, I think they played 46 matches on home soil and won 41 of them and drawn 5. So, you didn't really expect to go there and to turn them over. But the standard, I thought of England's performance was a marked down on what it was at its peak in the World Cup. And for that reason, then he's bound to be... He should be putting himself under pressure. He says in an interview today that he doesn't feel, under pressure, and maybe he should, but they won't make a change, will they? I mean, I wouldn't have thought so.
No.
Well, I mean, the FA, are fully bought into him.
But also in the British Olympic Association, he's pretty much on board for Tokyo. So, assuming the Olympics goes ahead, it would be very late to suddenly start changing that. So it seems like Tokyo's going to be very big for him. What he does with the GB team there, there needs to be coherence to their style, and I think that's what maybe people have been looking at in the build-up to the World Cup. They seem to be heading somewhere. There was more playing on the ball, playing out from the back more. And in the early games of the World Cup, as Paul said, it looked like, well, this is actually heading somewhere, and that's what it seems to me has been lost since then. And he needs to regather that. I wasn't massively surprised with the dip after the World Cup because that was such a massive experience for a lot. Some of them young players, and psychologically, it's hard to lift yourself at a friendly once you've been in a World Cup semi-final. But now that you haven't got that excuse now we're sort of into the spring of the following year, and there needs to be a reaction, and needs to be coherence, and needs to be direction.
When I said, sorry, you'd come under pressure, what I meant was there might be a loss of faith in him inside the squad, because the players, if they start asking themselves more and more, well, why am I not playing? Why is she not playing? Why are we playing this way? Why, that becomes very corrosive, doesn't it? And he would, if that happens, he will struggle to manage it, as all managers do.
Phil's in your face, full energy manager, isn't he? So
it's a high risk. It's a high risk.
They all bought into it to start with, but if you stop buying into it, then it can disintegrate quite quickly.
Arguably, Lucy Bronze isn't out there as well. They've made some changes defensively too. England then take on Japan in the She Believes later. Speaking of England, one Dean Henderson gets a mention on the back of nearly every paper for his exploits at the moment. This is in relation to whether Chelsea are looking at him. Of course, we've seen how well he's done with Sheffield United this season. 10 clean sheets in itself, phenomenal. Is he your number one for England now? Wilder said it yesterday.
He's not my number one for England. No, I would stick with Jordan Pickford. I don't think he's ever particularly let England down. There's been a few dodgy moments. And I like what he brings to the team. I like what he brings to the squad. He gets on well with Southgate. Clearly, they have a relationship. And I think it would be harsh to drop Jordan Pickford just on the basis of, a handful of mistakes this season at club level. As we highlighted before, Henderson has made the odd mistake. Only the odd one, probably a lot fewer than Pickford. But I still like what Pickford brings to that England team. And I think he combines well with the outfield players, so I would stick with him for now. I'm also a little bit... I know he's been fantastic, Henderson. No detracting from that, but it would also feel a little bit strange if a guy who basically was on loan to another club. It's just a bit... he can't get a Manchester United team now. His way is blocked, obviously, by arguably, and some would argue against this, but possibly the best goalkeeper in the world. So that's no real down point. But I still... it still would feel slightly odd, but he's certainly in contention. But Pickford, for me, I would stick with Pickford personally.
I should just correct myself. Wilder didn't say that he was England's number one. He wouldn't be drawn on that.
No.
I think it was Billy Sharp was talking about it, but that was again quite funny in his post-match when he said he got player of the match. It's his job as a keeper, isn't it? I paraphrase to make those saves.
Good saves. He's quite cutting, isn't he, about Dean Henderson, as Andy drew attention to. I think it's a style of play thing for England, and I know Dean Henderson hasn't been encouraged to play out from the back at Sheffield United. That's not massively their thing, but Jordan Pickford does. and that's how Southgate wants to play. So I think it's going to, it's going to have to be a big change for Southgate to take the shirt off Pickford, because I think Pickford is the goalkeeper who offers them that. Now, we talked about Ederson and Alisson earlier and what difference they make to City and Liverpool, and clearly Pickford's not as good as them. They're in a category above themselves. But it still would disrupt the whole England ethos, philosophy, if you're not going to go that way. And if you've got a keeper who's slightly uncomfortable doing that. I don't know whether Henderson could do that or not. I'm not saying he can't. It's just he's not doing that all the time, every week. So until he's at a club where he is doing that all the time, I think it's going to be difficult for him to get in Gareth Southgate's England. I'm sure he'll get chances, but as the number one keeper, I think it will be Pickford.
Shows how the game's changed when you're having a debate about whether the keeper can pass out from the back. I'm traditionalist enough to say, can he stop shots? Can he keep the ball out? But I accept that it's a factor these days. I think on the Manchester United front, Andy's point, I think De Gea has special treatment, really. I think some of his lapses have been overlooked because he's so powerful at the club. Every time he wants a contract, he gets a contract, and they've treated him very well, and they've given him special protection, which is part of the reason why Henderson's not there and he's out on loan.
Absolutely.
Had Henderson been there and playing for Manchester United, I think he probably would have shown himself to be a seriously good goalkeeper. I like him, I must say.
But you say that about De Gea, but he has been and has continued to be world class.
3 years ago, 3 years ago, he was probably one of the best in the world.
You're bad people. We were talking about Henderson and England. Go on.
No, I'm just saying. I know De Gea. We focus on his mistakes, but how many goals does he save for Manchester United? How many goals other keepers wouldn't save? I mean, it's bizarre. United have got like 3 great players all playing goal.
Yeah.
Arguably, the reserve keeper Romero is as good as reserve keeper as we've got in the league.
That's one tactic to employ in the Manchester derby.
Play them all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all right.
I don't think they'll be doing that. You see that ice hockey game this week? There was the fan in the crowd, and he was called into playing in goal. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Watch it. Take your gloves, boys.
Cold.
Right, in the final part, the handshakes are gone, but are the doors about to close? We'll talk all about coronavirus. That's coming up next. It's a little bit of a walk into the unknown over the next few days, at least. And this is picked up on the back of the papers. Sport faces virus chaos. This on the back of the Mail on Sunday. Sports authorities and broadcasters will meet the government tomorrow. This is a Department of Culture, Media and Sport, we believe, are meeting them tomorrow to thrash out coronavirus contingency plans. This comes, Andy, off the back of, we've seen clearly effects in Italy. Yes. The PSG game as well was postponed at the weekend. Morocco, they've stopped games. In Switzerland, they've stopped games too. And in your piece today, you talk about the fact that Liverpool could be presented with a trophy in an empty stadium. Do you think we'll get that far? Yes,
that seems to be the most likely scenario. I'm not saying that particularly the timing of it for Liverpool, but the most likely scenario, judging by what's happened in other countries, is the first precautions taken will be to play in an empty stadium, basically, obviously apart from the players and officials of each club. To me, that is, I understand why they would do that, and as Klopp said in the week, let's, rather abruptly to someone who asked him about coronavirus in the press conference, that maybe he wasn't the best person to ask. But it's very interesting out in the States where LeBron James, the basketball player, has said, well, if they put basketball games in front of no fans, he won't play. Because it's not. That's not what it's about. And I think that's a really interesting discussion, is that football without fans... I mean, we've done games behind closed doors, and it's just weird. I think you've done one, Caroline, as well.
Yeah, that game in
Croatia.
England played,
Yeah, when all you could hear was Jordan Henderson all night, basically. You couldn't understand him, but you could hear him. And I think that, there will come I think some clubs might say, well, you know what, really? If we're going to play behind closed doors, what's the point of playing at all? Obviously, there'll be TV ramifications for it. But I'm convinced. I mean, I say I've got no inside information, but I just cannot see the way, the way things have gone in other countries, why England and the Premier League will be any different, and indeed the EFL, why there will be any difference. And I just think it's probably a matter of time, matter of when, not if, you play behind closed doors. Clearly changeable, and it is every day, as we're seeing with these games that have been postponed. Still the pressure on upcoming events, that the Euros, of course, that we've got coming in the summer. So we don't know where we're going to be. They have to take the doctor's advice, which is, of course, Klopp's point. Would you rather, on that LeBron James point, they just say, right,
that's it, suspend all fixtures, don't play them behind closed doors?
Certainly not, because the contest is still the contest. It might be a bit eerie and strange, but it's still a game of football between two Premier League teams. I mean, the only tiny upside is that it does demonstrate the importance of supporters and fans. I think a lot of fans feel taken for granted these days, and a lot of people who run clubs and governing bodies think, well, OK, we have to accommodate these people, but we'll kick the game off when we want to, and they're just here to make a noise. But actually, you realise, if you take 60,000 people out of a stadium, you realise just how much of a game is about the human energy and the spectators and the passion and the involvement of fans. So at least we'll be reminded of that. But obviously it would be a pretty dark day if the coronavirus problem itself got to that point. It's not sport's problem. Sport will cope. Sport will survive. Sport will come through this. But if we're at the level where we have to shut football grounds down, then obviously society will have a major problem.
But Paul, I take that point. But if we're saying if the idea is that football matches, sports events aren't important in compared to a virus that is taking lives and could take a lot of lives. Clearly, football matches, you're saying, are not important. Right? So why play them at all?
Oh, I'm not saying they're not important. I'm just saying that the sport can't complain.
No, I wouldn't say you. I was saying that the general answer, from everyone, as I'm sure everyone would agree. Well, actually, you know what? When there's something like this, sport doesn't really matter, and football really doesn't. A football match is unimportant, as Klopp hinted. So then we're saying it's unimportant. Then why are we trying to play them anyway?
It's unimportant, obviously, in the scale of people's loved ones dying, isn't it? But
it's
sport actually is very
Premier League
important.
Finished.
Well, sport is obviously very important in the fabric of the culture and in terms of bringing us a degree of escapism. Now, where the balance is in that is very difficult to judge in a moment of what might be national crisis. But actually, football in terms of morale and having something to focus on, obviously, those could be incredibly important things in the months to come. So there might be that need for a degree of escapism. And if there's no actual health risk, I have no idea whether there is, of having sort of 300 people together at a football match, which is presumably how many people will be in a stadium, then there's no need to stop it, I wouldn't have thought. But it is this point about if Liverpool win the league, particularly at Anfield, where the whole hype of the coach getting to the ground, and maybe that cost them a league in the Brendan Rodgers year because it got so hyped up. To not have that would be a huge shame, because I think there, as much as anywhere, it shows how important fans are and how they are the backdrop.
We're dealing with ifs, buts, maybes at the moment, and we are likely to find out more in the next sort of 24 hours at least. Contingency plans wise, it was a very strange atmosphere when we did that game behind closed doors, not least because suddenly the players could hear the commentator the whole time, and if you get maybe a decision you don't agree with, and the player can hear you saying that.
But as a one-off punishment, that's what that was. That was a punishment because of how bad it is.
Right,
now you're saying you're going to have to do it.
That was Margaret Thatcher's idea in the 80s, wasn't it? Famously, she said, well, why, in days of hooliganism, she said, well, why can't you just play behind closed doors and have it on television, because satellite telly was coming. And I think it was actually football writers who were invited down street explained to her that just doesn't work. That is not football.
As you say, I mean, that's sort of beyond where we'll be in that decision making. But just interestingly, briefly on that point of Jurgen Klopp being asked about that, I think one of you was in that press conference we had with Arsene Wenger when David Bowie died, and he was asked about it. He gave this beautiful, beautiful answer at the time and was eloquent. How do we all feel about asking football managers something which maybe is out of their remit, as it were?
Well, I thought that question was fair enough because as I understood it, it related specifically to how it might affect Liverpool winning the title. It was about logistics and the continuation of the season. But he obviously took it as a question about a great sort of philosophical challenge to him, and I understand why he wanted to shut the question down. And I like the point he made in the sense that don't ask famous people for a worldview when their worldview is no more relevant than anybody else's. But on this occasion, it was really, really about, can Liverpool complete their season? How will this affect you?
I think they'd just been beaten 2-0, and they'd just been beaten for the second time on the spin. So I think that had something to do with it as well. He wasn't in the best of moods, because I'm sure if you asked him on another occasion, he said in his reply, don't ask us about politics yet. We've probably all seen a video of Jurgen Klopp speaking at length about Brexit and about politics, and that's probably about 10 million views, and he seemed to enjoy doing it then. But basically, famous people, you ask them about stuff that's not their within their remit because you're interested in them. He's an interesting person, isn't he? I mean, Klopp is a very interesting person. So to ask him about politics, to ask him about the implications of something like this, he's a bright bloke who you listen to. And so I think it's a fair question, as I say. And I think it was a fair answer. That's a fair answer. It was just delivered a little bit abruptly, but mainly I think that's because he just wasn't in a very good mood.
Also, he didn't know, does it? I mean, obviously he can't. He doesn't. He has no idea. No one has any idea whether we can. I mean, probably will finish season. We don't really know, and he doesn't want to entertain that thought at the moment. It's an epoch-making season to go. Well, maybe we might not be able to finish it.
Yes.
It's quite a disturbing place to go, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you all try it once in a while? Just throw in a question that you think might be a little bit left field, try and elicit a different response?
Only when the desk say, can you ask him about, the general election or something?
Well, they all have views. You will sit round. I mean, if you're having a drink with them, if you're having a pint with these guys, they will talk about the things that we might talk about. I mean, people like, for example, just off the top of my head, Sam Allardyce has very strong views on the education system. Now... And they are very, worth listening to. They're very interesting. So there's no reason these guys, maybe sometimes actually want to speak about stuff outside of their remit, because in the end they're living in this society. But they're as much a part of it as us, and they're high-profile members of this society. So if they've got views, I think it's great that they. And listen, when we do interviews with players or managers, one of the best interviews is when they talk about something else other than the ball hitting the bar, or we played well away from home, or we're going to play forward at the back. The interesting interviews are when they talk about stuff that is not actually football specific.
Mind you, when that happens, sometimes people start tutting, don't they? They say, what are you talking to him about that for? We want to find out whether the left back's injured.
But
they never tell you those things.
But a lot of the players, if you ask about, how are you going to get on in the Champions League or something, they've got a stock answer which the club has kind of briefed them on giving. But if you ask them about their politics, their faith, their interests, that's whether it's music or that's what we were doing. David Alaba a couple of weeks ago in Munich, and he's siblings are sort of pop stars in Austria. He loves his music. He wanted to talk about his Christian faith. He thinks that's really important. Asked him about sort of what can Bayern win the Champions League, and it was just like, we're back into cliche land. And so, obviously, it is interesting. You're trying to amplify the humanity of these people, going, well, what more is to them? But clearly, I mean, no one was asking Klopp whether he thought the coronavirus was going to spread, or, we're not asking for a medical opinion.
We weren't asking for a vaccine, anything like that. We were just asking him what basically... There's stuff, for example, at Newcastle where they banned handshakes. I think it was that sort of stuff that the guy was getting at. But it's always interesting to ask them about other stuff, because if for nothing else, it makes people realise that actually, there's more to them than football. They're real life, who are sort of amused and concerned and worried about the same things as all four of us around the table are.
I can't believe we've only got about a minute left and we haven't talked about the handshakes or lack of yesterday. Did you see the... All right, how you doing? Wasn't it like when you pass someone, you used to go...
We had this sort of standoff, obviously as they walk past, but then it doesn't really compute, does it? Because obviously when they score goals, they're all jumping over each other. So, I mean, in terms of sort of physical touch, there's much more physical touch when you celebrate scoring a goal and such like. So I understand why they've done it. Everyone's trying to send signals of, that this is, we're trying to contain this, but logically it doesn't make loads of sense.
It should never take place in the first place. It was a ridiculous idea in the first place. All those
50 years to get those handshakes.
Coronavirus has seen to the pre-match handshakes, which was a bad idea in the first place.
Yeah, there's a couple of managers spoken about that in the papers today. Hey, you know what? That's gone that time, an hour and a half. I will never shake your hand, Andy. I don't mean it at all. And you almost all finished your pastries too. Thank you for coming in, Andy. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Sue. Where are you all off to this afternoon?
Old Trafford for me.
All right, enjoy it. I'll give you a lift on the way back. That's it from us then here. Thank you for everyone that's been in touch with the show. Sue, a reminder, plenty to come though. Put your feet up, pump up that cushion for the rest of the day live on Sky Sports. Ross County Rangers, 11:30, so just about to kick off that one, build up to that one in the Scottish Premiership. Chelsea, Everton, Super Sunday starts at 1 o'clock. Then in the Championship derby, Blackburn, and Super Sunday concludes with Manchester United, Manchester City at 4 o'clock. A reminder, you can watch all the goals as they have the highlights too on the Sky Sports app. Thank you then. Don't forget you can catch up with today's show on the podcast and on demand. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week. Jackie will at 10. See you then. Bye-bye.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.